Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Rotary meeting for April 25th. We will be starting our meeting a little bit differently today. It will be on a sad note. Some of you may have already seen the email already about past president Doug McTavish passing away last week. Doug was a long-term member of our club, presently an honorary member of our club. He joined Rotary back in 1974 in our club, was president of the club in the early 90s and very active in the club. Most of us that have been a member for any number of years will remember Doug as a gentleman and always as an interesting individual to talk to. So I would like to start our meeting with just a moment of silence, and then we will proceed with our meeting. And now we will begin with our regular program, and I will call upon John Dactus to introduce our guest speaker.
Thanks, Don. Peter Rozeluk has been the Executive Director of Mission Services of London since 2010. Prior to that, he was a partner in a local accounting firm for 16 years, concentrating in personal, corporate, and estate tax compliance and planning as well as audits of nonprofits. Previous to that, he spent 10 years with KPMG in predecessor firms, first in Ottawa and then joining the tax group in the Waterloo office, where he's also a member of the International Executive Tax Group. Peter is a lawyer with a CPA, CA holding a JD degree, which is Juris Doctor degree from the University of Ottawa, a member of the Law Society of Ontario and a member of the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. He's a charter and current member of the Rotary Club of London Hyde Park and a Paul Harris Fellow +6. This August, he and his wife Sharon will celebrate their 39th wedding anniversary. He has 3 adult children and 2 grandchildren. He loves to study and watch birds and the stars. Unfortunately, he's a lifetime lover of the Detroit Red Wings and the Cincinnati Reds. That's just one of his very few things that Peter needs to work on. Peter is retiring this year after 12 years of mission services. Not only is Peter a peer and a colleague of mine, but he is more importantly a very good friend. So I introduce all of you to Peter Rozeluk.
So thank you again for inviting me. I have spoken at the club before. And as John mentioned, I am retiring this year. So I think what I decided I'd do is share some of my reflections over the last 12 years of being at Mission Services. So there are several topics I want to talk about. First is shelter system funding, just to give you a little bit of background for the rest of the presentation. A little bit about the shelter system, comparing of what it was like 12 years ago to what it is like right now. Talking a little bit about homelessness and poverty, because that's a question I get frequently of, how do we solve poverty, or what are the causes? And then a little bit about the RFP process that you may have heard about recently that the City of London had gone through. And then where do we go from here? And some provocative questions for you as Rotarians. I have absolutely no answers to offer. I'm just raising the questions. So with that, I'll start with the shelter system funding. It's generally funded by the province of Ontario. Emergency shelters in the past were funded by a program called the Community Homeless Prevention Initiative, CHIPPI for short. As of April 1st of this year, that as an amalgamation of several provincial programs, and we're now funded through the Homeless Prevention Program. So it is funding that comes from the province, but distributed and administered by the City of London. And most importantly, at the bottom, donor support is essential to nonprofits and especially emergency shelters. So as I look back over 10 years, the main funding was from CHIPPI. The 10-year average, just so you understand where not just Mission Services, but all emergency shelters come from, is 10-year average. The men's mission funding has been anywhere from 72 to 85%, and Rothhome the emergency shelter for families has been funded anywhere from 42 to 84%. Virtually, I can't think of an emergency shelter in London, in Ontario, or Canada that does not do fundraising. And the reason why they fundraise is because of what you see on the screen, is that the government funding does not fund 100% of emergency shelters. It wasn't always that way. 70 years ago, when Mission Services started, actually, we weren't getting any government funding. And so over the years, that has changed, and we are where we are right now. Again, a little bit more perspective on Mission Services. So our last, while the year that started just when the pandemic was starting, you can see that the CHIPE funding was about 74% for Men's Mission and 70% for Rothholm. So there was a significant difference that we actually had to fundraise for. And then this year, beginning of the fiscal year that just ended on March 31st, 2022, Mission Services, as with other emergency shelters in the City of London, were told that we'd be losing funding. So we were told that we'd be losing about $1 million of our funding, half of that at Men's Mission and the other half at Rothholm. Thankfully, with additional COVID funding from the province, we were able to get back about half of that 500,000. But that's I guess, part of the turmoil that's been in the emergency shelter system, not just last year, but as I say, for my entire stay while I've been at Mission Services of London. So that's a little bit of background and a backdrop to what I'm going to be talking about now. So my retrospective look. Back in 2010, when I started, there were 3 emergency shelters in London. Mission Services, we operated a men's emergency shelter and a family shelter, that would be Rothholm. And that was at that time the only family emergency shelter in southwestern Ontario. So that excludes the violence against women shelters, just an emergency family shelter. So our catchment area was, well, all of southwestern Ontario, from Windsor to Peel, from Lake Erie up to Tobermory. Salvation Army provided emergency shelter for men, women, and youth. And the Unity Project, the smallest of the 3 shelters, provided emergency shelter for men, women, and couples. So in 2022, you still have the same players, although there's one new emergency shelter provider. So Men's Mission really hasn't changed. Salvation Army, you'll notice they're no longer formally serves youth, and the youth are now served by Youth Opportunities Unlimited with their youth shelter. That's one component of the emergency shelter system. Another component are resting spaces. So back in 2010, we actually had what I believe was a very good functioning system for resting spaces for individuals who either would not or could not access the emergency shelters. So there was a safe place for people to go. And the way that system operated at that time was that there were some daytime drop-in centers operated by Mission Services and Salvation Army and at LOSA. They were on 8-hour cycles. And in addition to that, Mission Services provided what we called crash beds, which was an overnight resting space for people. So there was a place 24/7 where an individual could go in the city, both men and women, to have a safe place to be. For various reasons, one by one, those daytime drop-in centers were closed. And there were a couple of reasons, I believe. One of those was the introduction of drugs on the street that changed the behavior of participants, a much more volatile behavior that we were seeing of people who were accessing it, but also because of insufficient staffing, which was a direct result of insufficient funding. And I can tell you, I believe that Mission Services was the last one to drop our daytime space and our overnight space. And we had a lot of conversations with the City of London and the Ministry of Health in order to keep those open. And the funding just wasn't there. And so the consequence of that was that those things had to close. The good part of that is they were replaced. And so in 2022, today we have resting spaces. They are now offered by different organizations, by London Cares and My Sister's Place, and the CMHA Coffee House, which was closed during the pandemic. But alone or collectively, they weren't offering the 24/7 spaces. That was a little bit taken care of during the winter response, which over the last couple of years, you will be aware in 2021, there were 2 places where there were trailers set up at McMahon Park and at the corner of Colburn and York during the wintertime. This past year, there was some spaces at a golf course and at Parkwood Hospital as well. And those winter responses were really looked after or provided by ARC8 at LOSA, CMHA, and Impact, and then London Cares. Another part of the shelter system, particularly relevant during COVID, were isolation and monitoring spaces. And this may have been, in my 12 years, maybe the best thing that the City of London could have done has done, and certainly during COVID could have done. So I can tell you, and John would be able to affirm this, that in 2020, when COVID first started, there was a great deal of fear among shelter operators in the city, because we had absolutely no idea what would happen when COVID hit, and especially if individuals in shelter got COVID, there was a lot of fear of what would actually happen. One of the responses then was to set up isolation monitoring spaces. The city rented some spaces in hotels. Organizations provided the support for those spaces. And so anyone who was in contact with COVID or fell ill with COVID was able to be moved to an isolation and monitoring space and not necessarily go to the hospital. The result of all of that, I can tell you, is that to the best of my knowledge, since 2020, there has not been a single death of anyone in the emergency shelter system in London, nor has there been anyone hospitalized because of COVID from the emergency shelter system in London. And I can tell you that that is very unlike what has happened in other cities. So when I'm talking to colleagues across the country, I know that the emergency shelter system in Edmonton and in Ottawa and in Toronto, they did have deaths in the emergency shelter system. So a very vulnerable population, immunocompromised, and yet in London, they were able to escape, the scourge of COVID. There were outbreaks in the shelters, as you're all aware of, but frankly, there were no serious health issues. And so that is the sort of the one bright spot and the good thing that resulted and that occurred in the shelter system. So another part of my reflection, I take a look at social assistance, and this all does tie in together, and I'll get to that soon. But there are 2 main social assistance programs in Ontario that provide income to eligible residents who need financial help. The first is Ontario Works. It's financial assistance for some of you who maybe have lived a while, who are what's the right word, mature. This used to be called welfare back in the day. I can still remember that. Then the second is Ontario Disability Support Program, and that's for those individuals who are suffering a disability that limits their ability to work. So with both of those social assistance programs, there are 2 components. The first is a basic needs that looks after food and clothing, and the second is a shelter allowance that is provided so that those individuals or families can pay for their rent or mortgage, property taxes, and I've listed the things. The amount that an individual or family receives on both Ontario Works and ODSP varies by family size. So the question of why is there homelessness and poverty, I've listed some here. I've listed 6. The economy generally around us, the world economy, the Canadian economy, the London economy, the actual income that individuals have, the lack of safe, adequate, affordable housing, unemployment is a cause, addictions are a cause, illness, whether it's physical or mental, are a cause. There are going to be more than just those things, but all of these things are contributing factors. So I could talk on any one of those. I will choose two, and I want to talk about income and affordable housing as to what I have seen in the last 12 years and how that maybe answers the question of why there is homelessness and poverty. So I took a look at what individuals back in 2010 were receiving either on Ontario Works or ODSP. And you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, I don't know whether you can see my cursor, an individual on Ontario Works was getting $585, ODSP was getting $1042. Apartment rents, these are average rents for a bachelor apartment and a one-bedroom apartment. I've taken that from averages for London based on CMHC data. And you can see that for a bachelor apartment, 554. And so you can see what was left for an individual on Ontario Works and ODSP. Clearly, a one-bedroom apartment could not have been a single individual could not afford a one-bedroom apartment back in 2010 based on Ontario Works. And now we fast forward to 2020, and now an individual cannot even afford a bachelor apartment on Ontario Works. And you can see that for an ODSP, that's gone up to $1,169, but a bachelor unit is $785 and $1,012 in 2020. That $157 that's left for that individual is to pay for everything else other than shelter. So you're talking about your food, your clothing, your transportation. That is not an awful lot that's left. If you think about families, so again, in 2010, here's the amount that an individual or a couple would get with one child on Ontario Works is $1,150, on ODSP $1,738. Again, one-bedroom apartments are $705, a two-bedroom so that the couple can sleep in one and the child maybe have their own. This is what it was costing back in 2010, and you can see that the amount left over for this family, either Ontario Works or ODSP, that is what they had left over for everything else to live. Flash forward to 2020. The amounts, you can see that on the left-hand side, but the amounts remaining for the family to live has now drastically changed. And so I tried to put those things together. And in the bright yellow is 2010. And in the orange is 2020. And what I really want you to focus on is Ontario Works has increased in 10 years by 25.3%. For ODSP, it's increased by 12%. But the cost of a bachelor apartment in London, on average, has gone up by 41%. The increase in a one-bedroom apartment in London has gone up, on average, by 43.5%. When you take a look at a couple, you know, the information here is just as drastic, so that you can see that a couple with one child, their income over 10 years has gone up 14% on Ontario Works and 11% on ODSP. But the price of one-bedroom apartments has gone up by 43% and two bedrooms by 38%. So you can slowly see the erosion that's going on. You're all aware of, you know, what the housing market is like in London. And so individuals, families that are struggling with rent, that while they're struggling with rent, let alone with the thought or idea of the dream of buying a house. So that's well, for me, that was very sobering when I took a look back at what has happened over the last 10 years. So talked a lot about numbers. I'm sure some of you are probably sleeping now, so we'll change it a little bit. So another thread that I wanted to talk about was the RFP process. So that was a request for proposal, the first time ever that emergency shelters in the city had to provide a proposal. The reasons, I think, were because I believe that city administration probably believed that there were other agencies and organizations that really could provide emergency shelter services and wanted to get in. But unfortunately, there were no new, applicants to provide emergency shelter service. This RFP also interestingly had some components or thresholds or mandates in terms of what they wanted to see in their proposal from organizations. The one was a limit, a bed limit to the number of beds that was provided by an emergency shelter at any one location. A second was a mandating of staff to client ratio. And I can, for mission services for sure that I can talk about, we had never been able to achieve that type of staff to client ratio in the past. And the last thing, which I think is incredibly huge, is that the administration was admitting that they would only fund 80%. And so for me, in 12 years, that's a significant acknowledgement from city administration in the city. They don't pay all of the costs to maintain an emergency shelter. And if you think back to the earlier slides where I showed, the averages for mission services, where, we were getting 74 to 70%. There's even some question as to what that 80% funding actually meant, because in further discussions with administration at that time, I'm not sure that it including feeding individuals who were in the shelter. I don't think it even included things like the maintenance and the cleaning as well. So again, sure, they're going to be providing 80% of funding, but that was really a squishy kind of number, because it wasn't really clear what was included and what was not. The end result of all of that, without any new organizations coming through, and certainly we and I believe the other Salvation Army and Unity Project, we submitted proposals based on what it actually costs to operate the emergency shelters. And that might have been an aha moment with administration, because they came back and said, well, there isn't enough money in the system to pay. So they recommended to City Council that the RFP process be scrapped and it was replaced by a sole source contract. So we and Salvation Army Unity Project and YOU, Youth Opportunities Unlimited, have specific contracts to provide the services for our shelters. They are one-year contracts, renewable for the next, I think, 3 or 4 years. The certainty for us was that we know what we were going to get in the contract, and what we received as an organization was really what we were receiving back in 2021, so 2 years ago. So as you know, inflation has happened, everything is costing more, but the funding that we were receiving, which at that time was 70 to 75%, well, that's what we're receiving now, and that percentage is probably a lot lower. So where do we go from here? Well, I am sure that most of you have heard and keep hearing that there's a lack of safe, adequate, affordable housing in the city. That is very true. It's also very true, I would suggest, across the province and in the country as a whole. The question of, well, who's responsible? So over the last several months, I've been looking at some polls or seeing some polls of individuals, and what very much surprised me was that the majority of the community, whoever is being polled, is suggesting that it's actually government's responsibility to look after these social ills. And so I consider that, and I'm thinking of budget deficits that keep on growing with our governments. And I just don't know how they're going to pay for all of that. One thing that has, so that's the question of why, well, one, I guess the philosophical question of why should government be paying for that? And why not the private sector more? So one thing that I've been puzzled with, quite frankly, certainly over the last several years, but for many years before that, is I don't understand why the private sector isn't engaged more in this conversation of housing. In this city, we have some tremendous builders. We've got world-class builders who are investing their own money, who are efficient at what they do, who have built communities in London. You think of Sifton's, and you think of Drulo and ESAM, and there are scores of builders in the city. Why they're not engaged more, why the government hasn't reached out to them more, I really don't know. I just think that there's an awful lot of opportunity there that's not being maybe looked at. I know that our tax system is used as a fiscal tool, and we kind of encourage and nudge people to do things. For those of you who are, in businesses, or the scientific and research development credits, whenever you go to show a movie, whenever you go see a movie, at the end of the credits, there's always, thanks for the film industry and the credits. I've got to believe that from a tax perspective, that we would be able to encourage builders to build a range of housing through the tax system. But in any event, that's just a thought of mine. So now we get to some thought-provoking questions for Rotarians. And sort of the first thing is, the four-way test, well, is it the truth? And I'm thinking, well, there's a good starting place for as we ask these questions. Again, my acknowledgement, I have no answers. I just like raising questions. Prompted a little bit about this as I've been reflecting of what's being seen and what's being said. And part of that is, if we hear something repeated often enough and long enough, we start to begin to believe it without really thinking about it and considering whether it really is true, and really thinking about how accurate it is. So with that background, the first thought-provoking question for Rotarians is, who is responsible for solving homelessness? And if it is government, what level of government? Is it the federal or the provincial or the municipal government? And why? Why that particular level? I know that we hear about a national housing strategy, and often at conferences we'll talk about other countries having national housing strategies. And one question that's never been answered is, we have a federal system. We're not a unitary state. And so we've allocated jurisdiction over things, has been allocated between the federal and provincial governments. Very different from the rest of the world, and very different as well from our federal family members like the United States and Australia, who again, divide up their jurisdiction over things. There is nothing in our Constitution that talks about homelessness, but there is something in our Constitution that talks about private property and health. And those happen to be provincial matters. So again, just the question is, who is responsible? Should it be government at all? And then if it is, which level and to what extent? And because there you get into tax dollars and deficits. And it is a question I don't think that we've wrestled enough as a community to really figure out. And the next one is a very provocative question, but we're Rotarian, so is housing a human right? And why or why not, and what are the implications? I really do not know the answer to this question. I quite frankly have not heard of a good rationale or explanation of why it's a human right. You get into that whole question of, well, where do human rights come from? Are they bestowed on us by government and can be taken away? Are they inherent to us? And I guess more important with this question is, what happens if housing is not provided? Who is responsible for that, and who is sanctioned for that when it doesn't happen? And if it is, then, well, that would be true anywhere across the world. So again, I think a lot of good community discussion needs to happen on just what the responsibility for our neighbors and where that lies. But again, I have no answers. I'm not suggesting any answers. But it is a good topic for conversation. So why is there homelessness and poverty? I've listed some things. This is just the same slide, except I've added, it's complicated and it's nuanced. It has taken us many years, more than even the 12 years that I've been at Mission Services, to get to where we are. We're not going to be getting out of this anytime soon. It takes years to build apartments and condos and more housing, and we need those in the pipeline. So I guess that's again maybe a main message too, is it is very complicated, the whole notion of poverty and homelessness, and we really need to have some thoughtful conversations about that. This was a slide. Well, actually, this poster was given to me by an audit partner in the Waterloo Pete Marwick office back in the 80s, I guess. I feel like the frog sometimes. But the good thing is, yeah, you never give up because you never know what'll happen. finally, I want to end with a happy face, and I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to your club. I want to say thank you to Rotarians generally, and I want to say thank you to the community. We hear an awful lot of negative views in all types of social media. And I think that maybe starts wearing us down a little bit. I think we need to express our gratitude and say thanks an awful lot more, because there is a lot of good things that are happening in our world around us. I personally believe that the world is in a better place today, despite of all the horrific things that are happening. As a whole, we're in a better place than we were a century ago. People are living longer. There is, I believe, adequate food. The health is getting better. The world is a difficult environment to live in, but things are good. And so I wanted to share some of those things with you. I mean, the shoebox project that was started by Michelle Foote, what a wonderful thing. I think of RBC Place, where you used to hold your in-person meetings prior to the pandemic. Sharing their leftover food with organizations, you know, the leftovers after events and banquets, with shelters, with MSL in particular, but with other organizations. Your club for supporting the Internet Cafe and the activity room at Rothholm, as one of its 100th anniversary projects. Through the years, your club collectively and individual members have supported your neighbors, and with simple things like socks, and with celebratory things like turkeys at Thanksgiving and Christmas. So you've all played a role in helping your neighbor and making London certainly a better place. And I've already mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again. Like, I got to thank the City of London for what they did with their isolation and monitoring spaces. That made a huge difference in the lives of our most vulnerable. There's so much for me to be thankful for, and I will suggest that there is so much for you collectively and individually to be thankful for as well. And so that's my presentation. I will, let's see if I can stop sharing my screen, and I will. So are there any, I'm open, I don't know how you're operating this. I'm certainly open to questions. I have no idea how long I've taken, so I will.
We have about 5 minutes for questions, and we ask people to raise their hand, either visually or using the raise hand icon in Zoom. So I think I saw Rick's hand go up first.
Yes, thank you very much, Peter. Exceptional presentation, and it helps us get grounded as Rotarians when we hear these things. Has any of your research or knowledge of this area of homelessness brought you to explore international countries where they might have lower levels of homelessness or lower problems? I think of a country like Sweden, which is a modern, developed country, and it follows, and I'm not promoting a political system here, but they're probably one of the most socialized developed countries in the world, and whether they are experiencing the same things, even though they have a heavily socialized country.
Yeah, so I'll answer that in two parts. The first is I visited Ukraine back in the 1970s when it was still part of the Soviet Union. You want to talk about a socialized country, that would have been it. Yeah. I can tell you that they had just as much poverty and homelessness there at that time, and I will hazard a guess that the same is true. In terms of other international countries, I do a quirky thing when I'm on vacation, much to my wife's embarrassment. I'll visit emergency shelters where I go. So I've been in the UK and in Scotland. I'll spend a day visiting emergency shelters there and talking with people on the street. And my experience has been in the UK and actually in the United States, going to different cities, you know, they're dealing with the same issues that we are here. And it is uncanny, actually, at how similar the issues are, whether it's addictions or mental health. You know, maybe in a weaker moment, I would say, not that it's part of the human condition necessarily, but I think that humans have been dealing with poverty for a very long time. And it just, we care for our neighbors and we try to reduce it. I'm not convinced that we can eliminate it, but we can really work hard to reduce as much of it as we can. And I think we get overwhelmed sometimes when we look at how large the issue is, and we have to look at those small victories that we get every day. So a long-winded answer to say, I haven't seen differences in the countries that I've visited.
Okay, thank you.
Jerry, I think you were next.
Hi, Peter. It's Jerry. Peter, I just want to let you know that there's a huge issue. I've been trying to get to the bottom of it for the last 2 years at various levels. I'm not going to take a lot of time, but if you want to get together, I can update you and kind of maybe even say some of my ideas, thinking. I had a meeting with Minister Clark last Wednesday in London. We talked about projects like Indwell. I've been in contact with Jeff Nevin out of Hamilton, Indwell, etc. And again, I'm not going to take time, but bottom line is, so I'm running provincially in London North Centre, coming up in June's election, and it is very busy for me. But if you would want to get together over lunch, I can update you. And as I said, I'm a business guy, but I believe that if we don't take care of these issues, we are not going to move forward as a society. So as I said, I can talk to you for hours, but if you want to do a quick lunch, I would be more than happy to. There are a lot of issues. And I'm starting to see slowly the light at the end of the tunnel. And Minister Clark, he agrees. And Jeff Nevin has, just in my riding, there are 3 proposed buildings, and hopefully we'll get out of it. And we have to as a society, no doubt.
Yep. Thank you for your comments. I'll give a shout out to Indwell as too. I mean, Indwell is looking at a specific targeted demographic. I believe they are an absolutely wonderful organization that would work with collaborate with emergency shelters. So they're, as I said, they're looking at a particular demographic, but there is no reason why we wouldn't, and we do, and we want to collaborate with them. But yeah, they've got a really good model.
They do. And just last quick thing, I do believe, and that's my personal belief, if you want to resolve it, we really have to have at the table all 3 levels of government. And there are certain ideas I think that each government can bring together. And if we will, and sooner we do, the faster and better, more efficiently we get out of this.
Bud, you have a question.
Peter, I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but my question is, what would happen if social services like yours didn't exist? Who would step up?
Well, there's a good question. Well, we came into existence 70 years ago because there was a need. It wasn't because it was mandated. Governments did not provide that need. Individuals, groups thought there was a need. I believe that if we were to disappear, there would be another group that would come in and serve that need. So just like, remember I discussed what was happening, or I showed what happened with the resting spaces, where for various reasons, the organizations that were doing that could no longer do it. But they were replaced by other organizations. So no, even if we were to stop, I believe that community groups would help.
Like maybe the private sector?
Oh yeah, maybe.
And
Thank you.
Howard, you'll be our last question.
Thanks, Don. And thanks, Peter. Great presentation. I want to follow up on Bud's question. And it goes to when you were introducing, you said when it was founded, it was all fundraising by the organizations. Were the community better served then with the fundraising before the government got involved?
Well, where the money comes from, I don't think you can tie that into whether they were better served or not. I think that the population that they were serving at that time it's very different today than it was back then. So the way we're serving has necessarily changed. I wouldn't say whether it's better or not. Money is a constraint in how well and how much service you can deliver. And you know, even back in the day when it was all fundraising, you couldn't possibly help everyone. And it's obvious if all that we relied on was government funding, we could not be serving all of the people that are needing our help. So you collectively, you individually are supporting the donation. So I heard your question, but I wouldn't make that connection that way.
Okay, thanks.
So I think that's our time for question and answer. Peter, I would like to thank you. You did ask some very thought-provoking questions, so it was a great presentation. Homelessness and low-income housing is something our club's been working on a lot in the last couple of years, so it was really relevant to us. Also, I'd like to thank you for the years you've put in at Mission Services. I know it's not always an easy job for you. It would be quite challenging some days, so thank you very much. And as a fellow Rotarian, you will probably appreciate that in recognition of your presentation to our club today, a contribution has been made to the Polio Plus campaign of the Rotary Foundation to immunize 50 infants against polio. Because of you, Rotary is one step closer to a polio-free world. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And on to some club business. I think the first and most important item is our back to in-person meetings. This is something we've talked about on a number of occasions over the last few months. We had a special committee struck to look at options and opportunities for resuming in-person meetings. That committee reported back to the board last Wednesday with a number of recommendations, which the board tweaked, I think, just a little bit, but mostly accepted entirely. And we are on a path to returning to in-person meetings again. A lot of big changes coming for our club that has been meeting Monday at lunch for over a century. I'm a little bit nervous about changing that, but it was what we heard through our strategic planning process that we do need to start changing a little bit. So we will now be moving to 2 meetings per month. Our first meeting of the month will be a virtual meeting on the second Monday of the month at noon. So essentially the same as what we are currently doing. And our second meeting of the month will be an in-person meeting. It will be a dinner meeting, and it will be on the 4th Monday of the month in most months, unless there's something that complicates things, but 4th Monday of the month at 6 p.m. Our in-person dinner meeting is going to be at the Highland Golf and Country Club. Cost of dinner is $50. Some of you are thinking, but our lunch costs used to only be $25 or $23 or $26, or I forget exactly now. It's been so long since we actually had a lunch meeting. Yes, your meal cost has gone up, but your cost of Rotary meals over the course of the month has dropped in half. So it's a great bargain for you to go to Rotary and have dinner once a month. And we also encourage you to bring your partner if she or he is involved in Rotary, and call it a date night if you can get away with that. That works in some families, doesn't work in others. I tried it already this weekend. It didn't go over that well. She will be attending, but I don't get to call it date night. This is a trial until October, at which point the board will review and see how it's going. So do we have attendance up? Is it good for the health of the club? Are we getting the benefits out of these changes that we were hoping to get? During the next little while COVID is still front and foremost in everybody's minds, we will also be maintaining a hybrid access option for those evening meetings. That probably will not go on necessarily forever, but at least in the next little while, for the folks that aren't comfortable going out to an in-person event, we will maintain a hybrid option. So what does that mean for us in May? That means we aren't really going to change a whole lot. We've got 2 speakers scheduled for early May. So our meetings of the 2nd and the 9th will continue as virtual meetings at noon. Things start changing on the 16th. We will not have a meeting on May the 16th. We will be meeting on the holiday Monday, Victoria Day Monday, May the 23rd. This is not going to be a really super formal meeting. We are going to be doing our community Paul Harris Fellow presentation. And there will be, I think, a short presentation from the recipients of the community Paul Harris Fellow presentation. And there will also be time for fellowship, because we've heard loud and clear that fellowship is very important for the health of the club. So that Monday, the May the 23rd, we will be doing a meeting, and it primarily focus will be the community Paul Harris Fellow presentation. On the 30th of May, we will not have a meeting, and during May, we will be starting to get all the meeting times and locations on the website and in the COG, so that it's very clear to everyone which meetings are where and when. It's going to be a change for all of us, but I think it's good for the health of the club. And if you have more questions, you want to go into the details of what the Back to In-Person committee did and what they looked at and different options they considered, I did send out a full copy of their report this morning for everyone to look at if they are interested in more details.
John?
Yes.
If I just may make one additional comment, just so the membership understand, the $50 meeting fee includes the room setup, rental, and taxes and service gratuities and that. So it's an all-in fee, and that and there will be available a bar for those that wish to have an adult drink, shall we call it, but so that's accessible, which members will pay for them directly themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. So the next announcement is we still have the Rotary Ranch Party coming up on May 6th. That is less than 2 weeks away. If you have not gotten your tickets yet, you can still sign up for tickets on the website. If you are looking at a sponsorship, please reach out to myself or Howard or Jim, and we'll hook you up with a sponsorship. Similarly, if you are looking to buy a whole table of tickets, we would be glad to talk to you and not go through the website so that we can save on credit card fees. Diane is still looking for auction items, silent auction items and live auction items. And I think that is everything I need to mention about the Rotary Ranch Party. Get your tickets and get your auction items in. I also have a quick reminder. We're not going to talk a lot about it yet because we have the ranch party underway and I don't want to distract us, but just to save the date, September 10th is going to be the 5th annual President's Cup golf tournament at Witter Station, just outside of the greater Thetford area, or in the greater Thetford area. Heather will be organizing it this year, and there will be an early bird rate, but right now, please just get that into your calendar for September 10th. And then I will turn it over to Peter for a quick announcement from the Hyde Park Club.
Sure. Thank you very much for the time. We do have a fundraising raffle at our club. It's a Canadian tapas dinner for 8 at your home. The prize is valued at $1,500 and is a catered Canadian tapas dinner for 8 to be held either in your home or garden. It includes all of the food, the wine, the chef, the wine expert, and wait staff. So there is I believe that well, I'm looking at my copy of the poster. At the bottom, there's information that's available. I'm sure that I'll get that. Someone from our club will get that over to Dawn. But you can buy the tickets. They're $10 each, or 3 for $20. The draw is being held on May the 13th at 9:30 p.m. And the winner will be contacted by phone. So if you're interested in a Canadian tapas dinner and want to support our club as well, please buy your tickets. Thank you.
Just want to remind, thank you for 10 of you who've signed up for the food bank this coming Wednesday. We have 10 people. That's great. And I'll send out some instructions on where to go, although I think most of you are pros by now. So thanks for everybody who signed up for that.
Okay. And Keith, you have your hand raised for an announcement.
Yes, through Club Runner, I've made the membership aware of massive amounts of surplus PPE. A couple weeks ago, coming from the Grand Bend Rotary Club. So I want to give a great shout out to Bob Early, who assisted me from our club with Brian Hall and Paul Turnbull from the Rotary Club of Grand Bend that distributed this PPE to doctors' offices and places around London on mostly on this past Friday. So versus stuff going to the dump, it was put to good use. And thanks again to Bob Early, who came to the forefront and probably was achy and stiff and tired at the end of the day. I see him shaking his head down there. Yeah, it was we got the job done, but it was a lot of work. Thanks, Bob.
A few quick notes. Our meeting next week, we are still meeting Monday at noon virtually. Our speaker will be Christine Allen from the Ontario Securities Commission. The Satellite Club meeting, I don't have the details on that yet. The data cancellation on the park cleanup on Saturday due to weather, and they're looking at rescheduling the park cleanup, and it will probably be an evening in the next couple of weeks. Our next board meeting for the club will be Wednesday, May the 18th at 5 p.m. And of course, for the next little while, we will still have cocktail hour Tuesdays at 5 and the coffee clutch Thursdays at 10:30. Thank you, everyone. We've had a wonderful meeting, and a reminder that we in Rotary serve to change lives. Thank you, everyone.